The Drakengard and NieR games are long-standing interwoven stories with many related events, themes, and settings. Fortunately, the worldwide success of NieR Automata has spawned a significantly increased interest in the previous less well-known games. The PlayStation 3 saw 2 HD games in the series come to light, NieR being the cult classic from which NieR Automata succeeded. Despite having less immediately recognisable characters and mythology than those you may find in NieR Automata, especially at first glance, Drakengard 3 is actually a prequel to the entire series. How's it going everyone, Tazen here, and in today's video I'll be providing you all an introductory overview of Drakengard 3 and NieR and why you should play these JRPGs, especially if you're a fan of NieR Automata. So going in chronological order, let's begin with Drakengard 3. Developed by Access Games for the PlayStation 3 and published by Square Enix, Drakengard 3 was released physically in Japan on December 19th, 2013, in North America on May 20th, 2014, and digitally in PAL territories one day later. The fourth game released in the Drakengard NieR series, but chronologically the first, this Japanese action RPG was directed and co-written by Yoko Taro, who also directed and co-wrote Drakengard 1, in addition to 2 of its sequels, NieR and NieR Automata. The game's music was composed by Keiichi Okabe, who composed the soundtracks for both NieR games, creating another incredible album in this game with its own unique flavour. The backstory of Drakengard 3's world, told through the Drakengard 3 World Setting book, begins in Europe over a century before the events of the game. Up until 856 AD, Earth's history was the same as ours, until a giant earthquake occurred along the coast of Spain. This event was mysteriously followed by dragons and many other sentient mythical life forms suddenly appearing in the world, alongside a futuristic city that came down from the sky overnight. After the city appeared, some humans in the world began being able to harness magical power, of which the city was considered the source. Renamed the Cathedral, the city prospered in significant magical and technological advancements until a cataclysmic magical explosion in 995 AD encompassed the city. The city turned to ruins and traces of all known humans in it vanished, along with their century of magical and technological discoveries. The game's story picks up within the following decades after this event and revolves around the character Zero, her dragon companion Mikhail, and her 5 sisters. Zero and her sisters are known as Intoners, revered godlike humans who showed up shortly after the collapse and began protecting the people in the surrounding lands using the magical power of song. Each of Zero's sisters has a bodyguard disciple, and with that person they are each able to summon and control mysterious godlike beings from another world. In this game, these otherworldly beings are mostly referred to as angels, but throughout the series they are also referred to as the Watchers and the Servants of God. Despite the caring and protective nature of the Intoners, Zero is mysteriously trying to kill all her sisters with the aid of Mikhail and a mysterious flower growing out of her right eye. Along the journey, you'll learn about the origins of the Intoners and their magical powers, the mystery of the flower in Zero's eye, why Zero is trying to kill her sisters, why Mikhail is so important this fight, and the drastic effects magical phenomenons are having on time and space. With visible enemies in the field, the gameplay is action-based and somewhat similar in nature to Devil May Cry, especially in regards to the story progressing via missions, each contained within chapters like the other Drakengard games. During combat, you're able to change between several weapon types on the fly and string together combos depending on both the type of weapon you use and also depending on the combination, timing, and direction of the buttons pressed. When a tension gauge fills up, Zero can also activate her Intoner mode and use incredible magical power for a short period of time. Part of the game is also played using the dragon Mikhail, some parts being rail shooters like in Panzer Dragoon, others with free control in both the air and on the ground, and some parts where he can be used as an AI companion alongside Zero. Along the journey, you also have up to 2 AI-controlled disciples in your party. The game has 4 branching paths and alternate endings, each canonically explained, with ending D providing the final conclusion within the game. Once completing ending A, you'll be taken back to a certain point in the game and go down alternate route to ending B, then followed by ending C and finishing with ending D. In order to complete ending D though, you're required to have collected all of Zero's weapons in the game. However, a Japanese novella was later released by Jun Aoshima, which details the events of a 5th alternate ending known as ending E. It is this novelised ending that actually leads into Drakengard 1, and is also the story which reveals the origin of the Red Eyes disease that later becomes one of the main plot points throughout the following games. The game sold over 114,000 copies in its first week in Japan, and approximately 150,000 copies by the time it was released in the West, Critically, it received both positive and mixed reviews. It was more positively received in Japan, with praise to its characters, story and world setting, and much of its mixed reviews coming from the technical issues the game faced, including screen tearing, frame rate drops, and some roughness in its combat. The game went on to receive a DLC expansion with playable prequel chapters for each of the intoners, alongside DLC music tracks and DLC costumes from the other Drakengard and NieR games. Drakengard 3 also received lots of additional written story content, one in the form of a prequel novella found in the game's collector's edition, which tells more of the characters' stories prior to the game. Furthermore, it received a prequel manga called Drakengard 3 Utahime 5, which reveals more of the mysteries in the cathedral after its collapse. It also received a sequel manga called Drakengard 1.3 that tells the alternate story of a Drakengard 1 set several hundred years after Drakengard 3's ending A instead of ending E. Furthermore, it received a Japanese guidebook and even art and world settings book which explains more of the game's backstory and setting. It's worth noting that Jun Aoshima, who wrote the Ending E novel, also wrote the two NieR Automata novels. And now picking up the game that continues the story following the final ending of Drakengard 1, that being NieR. Developed by Cavia and published by Square Enix, NieR was released physically on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in Japan and Australia on April 22, 2010, in Europe 1 day later, and in North America on April 27th. The game sold two different versions in Japan. NieR Replicant was released on the PS3 and features the canonical younger NieR with his sister. NieR Gestalt was released on the Xbox 360 however, and features the much older NieR with his daughter. It was the more western Xbox 360 version that ended up releasing on both the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 outside of Japan. The third game released in the Drakengard NieR series, this Japanese action RPG was also directed by Yoko Taro. It was co-produced by both Takuya Iwasaki, who has worked on several Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts games, and Yosuke Saito, who produced both NieR Automata and Dragon Quest XI. Like Drakengard 3 and NieR Automata, NieR's music was also composed by Keiichi Okabe, and it heavily features vocals from half Japanese, half English singer Amy Evans, who created unique songs by transforming words from over 6 different languages. The backstory of NieR's world, told through the Grimoire NieR World Setting book, begins in modern-day Tokyo on June 12, 2003, in a parallel timeline that likely diverged off from the Great Cataclysm in 856 AD. As a result, NieR's world may have never experienced the earthquake and arrival of the cathedral, dragons and other beings, but instead remained untouched by magic and the Red Eyes disease, thereby following the path of our own world history up until 2003. During the conclusion of Drakengard 1's final ending though, ending E, the two main characters cross dimensions during the final battle, instantly travelling almost 1,000 years into the future and landing in our own timeline right above Shinjuku. Amidst their chaotic battle, the clash and outcome between one of Drakengard 1's dragons and one of the angels had drastic consequences because it unfortunately resulted in magical energy known as Maso being exposed to our world too. Shortly after the conclusion of this battle, Maso particles from the angel soon began infecting humans and causing them to either die or go berserk. Despite scientists thinking it was a disease identified by particles that they determined were from an alternate universe, it actually turned out that the infected people were given an ultimatum by either the gods in the Western version or by the one and only god in the Japanese translation of the series. Those who rejected the God's Pact suffered from the White Chlorination Syndrome and died by turning into a statue of salt. However, those who accepted the pact were turned into a legion, a mindless and berserk white monster that was bound by the will of the god in its continued effort to bring the human race to extinction. The situation worsened when several legions began appearing with glowing red eyes, sentient versions who were able to control the growing horde of legions. Known as Red Eyes, these more sentient monsters made the legions much harder to defeat, and among them there was one that was most well known, being named the Red Eye. Attempts to bomb Tokyo initially succeeded, but then later failed when it made the Maso particles airborne, turning the situation into a global pandemic. To find a cure to the disease and defeat the monsters, humans studied and learnt to instead harness the magical Maso particles introduced from the dragon, which led to the creation of both people who could wield this magical energy to varying effects, as well as technologically advanced androids tasked with ensuring mankind's survival at all costs. After more than 50 years of intense war and over 1,000 years of using the dragon's magic to remove the Maso particles left behind by the angel, the war was seemingly won and humanity's survival ensured. Or was it? The story told in the game fast forwards to not long before the mid-3000s. Going by the canonical Japanese PlayStation 3 version, a young teenager named NieR is living in a small village with his sister who is sick from an illness known as the Black Scrawl. He tends to her every need in a world that now has little to no knowledge of the past 1000 years, nor even the technologies from the 21st century. From time to time, people die of this illness, while many are also threatened by mindless dark monsters outside the towns, known as shades, which are slowly becoming more intelligent over time. When NieR's sister Yona sneaks off to find a lunar flower for him, NieR encounters and attacks a talking magical book in the process, who introduces himself as Grimoire Weiss. Dispersing the pages of the book, Grimoire Weiss makes a pact with NieR, allowing him to harness the book's magic so that they can find the missing pages together and store Grimoire Weiss's memories. Along their adventure, they meet several unnaturally powerful companions called Kaine and Emile, and NieR has his sister stolen by a powerful sentient shade. At all costs, he stops at nothing to find and save her. With visible enemies in the field, the gameplay is action-based and feels like a precursor to the battle system in its later sequel. With the level up system, the player is able to fight as NieR using various weapons and control various magical abilities using Grimoire Weiss, much like one of the pods in NieR Automata. When fighting bosses, you'll stagger them at a certain health, which requires you to then deal a certain amount of specific damage on a clock timer. Otherwise, their health will regenerate and will require you to repeat the process again. Along the journey, you'll also have Emile and Kaine as AI party members. Similar to its sequel, the game features unique sections that play out like rail shooters, side view platformers, top-down dungeon crawls, and even a unique text-based dungeon. Overall, it features 4 main endings in the game. On your first playthrough, you'll receive ending A, then you'll be taken back to redo the last 10 hours of the game, now learning more about Kaine and the bosses you defeated during this second playthrough. Once finishing it and watching ending B, you'll then be taken back to repeat the final 10 hours a third time, allowing you to now continue to an additional boss fight that takes place after the first 2 endings, if you have by this point collected every weapon in the game. After the final boss fight, you can choose from either ending C or ending D, diverging timelines that conclude the story in alternate manners. Getting ending C is recommended first, followed by restarting your save file at the final battle and then selecting ending D, because this final ending completely wipes your save file. The story does have a 5th ending though, ending E, however it's told in the Japanese Grimoire NieR worldbook. Unlike Drakengard 3's ending E, which follows its own alternate ending, the ending E in NieR is instead an epilogue set several years after the events of ending D, both of which NieR Automata is a sequel from. As you might be able to tell, each sequel from Yoko Taro continues from the final ending E of each story, with Drakengard 2 being the exception, as it was the only game in the series he had very little involvement in, and he often considers it non-canon or taking place in its own completely separate timeline. However, that's something that's still subject to debate, as it's possible it does take place after one of the earlier endings in Drakengard 1. With NieR Replicant being far more popular in Japan than its Xbox 360 counterpart, it was the top selling game in its first week with more than 60,000 sales, while NieR Gestalt sold just over 12,500 copies in its first week. Despite mixed reviews, the game went on to become a beloved cult classic, receiving a Japanese audio drama CD that tells more of the backstory of some of the main characters, a Japanese art and world guidebook with lots of the preceding story, especially linking Drakengard 1 to NieR's current story in the game, and the game also received a DLC chapter, providing more challenging battles with story references to Drakengard 1's ending. The game later went on to receive an official reprint in 2017, and surprisingly, in 2017, the game also received a sequel, which is set 10,000 years later. NieR Automata reveals important parts of what's happened to the humans and their android protectors since the concluding events of NieR, and in this sequel, the Red Eyes disease also makes its eventual return, now in evolved digital form, therefore continuing the story of the gods, or single god in the Japanese version, trying to bring the human race to complete extinction. Given the worldwide success of NieR Automata, we may yet again see another game in the series revolving around the underlying war between humankind and the world's creator, one of which until now remains perpetually trapped in a never-ending spiral of life and death. So there we have my JRPG recommendations for both Drakengard 3 and NieR, especially if you're a fan of NieR Automata, and I've made sure to, although provide an introductory overview of what's told in the game, I wanted to go a bit more in depth with the backstory of the games just because there's sort of information as to the story that wasn't particularly told in the games themselves, but rather, as I mentioned, in the world setting guide for Drakengard 3 and the world setting guide for NieR. And having sort of a better understanding of the story that's told through these currently Japanese exclusive books, it helps you get a lot more out of the actual game story when you go into it, and even sort of be able to better bridge the gaps between all of the games. Regardless though, I very much love these games and I really hope that they do one day get a remaster. It'd be great to see a remaster of them both, even together as a HD collection, giving sort of a lot more expanded things in it, like including the DLC that was released separately with them, maybe some of the novella information that was released alongside the games, the written material, and even adding some things like with NieR, allowing us to play as either Father NieR or Brother NieR from the currently Japanese exclusive version. So there we have it, I'll leave it at that. Let me know your thoughts below. Does this get you excited to play Drakengard 3 and or NieR? And have you maybe even played either or both of these games? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and regardless, let me know your thoughts about what you think of NieR Automata and whether you really enjoy that story too, both by itself or even before or after having played either of these games, or even Drakengard 1. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, hope you all enjoyed, and until next video, stay spot on.